Hi everyone, it's Jessica. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're here for another week of the Holly Jolly Sampler Quilt Along. This week we are making the Toffee block and the Molasses cookie block. So let's get started. Let's get started on the first block this week. This is called the Toffee block, and I have pieces laid out for almost half of the block here, so you can follow along in the pattern. For me, it's easiest to lay the pieces out and start sewing. And what you're going to do is just sew rows together. So you'll sew those into rows, you'll sew these into rows, and then you'll sew each of these rows together on both sides. And once you have these rows sewn together, then you sew them to this middle part. And you repeat this layout twice because this is one half and then you need another one that's a second half, and then we make a center strip also. So let's get started sewing these together. So I'm just going to get each piece that I had laid out and sew them together here into rows. After you make the two sides of your block, you just need to make the center strip, which is easy compared to the other part. You're basically just sewing these things together in a row. So I'll take the red, sew it to my green, and then I will repeat that on the other side as well. Now we're going to start sewing the whole block together. So I'm just going to take one side and my center. And basically, I'm just going to nest this center seam and hold it, and then work backwards. And once I get to the place where my green is ending, I'll start sewing. I'll come on to the green, and then I will sew all the way across. Once I get to this first seam that I'm holding with my fingers, I'll stop, sew to the other one, stop, and then just reposition. Okay, and now we have a little bit more than half the block made. So we take the other half and put that on here. Again, nest that seam and work backwards so everything is laying nice and flat. And then start sewing on. And then sew across the whole way just like we did on the other side. Okay, and what we have so far is something that looks like this. And we need to put corners onto each area here at the end of the long green piece. Now these two are flat because that's how we made these sides, but this one is oversized. So I'm going to use my ruler and a rotary cutter to trim this. Now if you want, you may press this before. That's completely up to you. And basically what I'm going to do is just make sure it's laying flat. I'm going to line up my ruler with the green. And once I'm straight in line with the green here, I'm just going to cut the rest of these white pieces off. And then I will repeat this on the other side. Then we take our corners and we're going to sew those on. Now the way I do this is just how like I'm adding any corners. We've done this before in this quilt already. I do this all the time when I'm adding any type of corner to my block. I fold the triangle in half, try to be as accurate as possible, and then I crease to make the center. So now I know where the center of this triangle is. Then I'm going to take whatever corner I'm sewing it onto and find the center point in that. So here I'm going to match up these two green edges and then come here and crease this green part. And once I have the green part creased, I take the center piece on my triangle, line it up with the crease of my green portion, and then make sure the triangle is laying flat and then sew across. And what this does is make sure that this triangle is perfectly centered. And then repeat this at all of the corners. After you have all the corners on, it's time to trim the block. And I pressed it so everything was laying nice and flat. And now I'm going to take my 12.5-inch ruler and trim it. And so just like when we've trimmed other blocks before, specifically the gingerbread, you're going to find the vertical center and the horizontal center, and you're going to line half of the block size up with that. So in this case, it's 6 1/4. So 6 1/4 is going across this center. 6 1/4 going across this center. So I just bumped it. And once you have it nice and centered, you can go ahead and cut. Your first 2 sides, you just rotate the block and line up the ruler on the edges. You can double check yourself. Your 6 1/4 should be going across the vertical and horizontal center again. But if you have everything lined up just right, it will. And then here is the finished toffee block. For the next block, we're making the molasses cookie. I'm making just a little bit of color changes to mine. So the first thing we need to do is make a 9 patch. And these are the colors that I'm using in my 9 patch. Since I'm just doing red and green and white in my quilt, not the black or the pink, I am substituting a little bit. So this is what my 9 patch looks like. I like to sew these together vertically. So I'm going to start with the first 2 pieces in the first row and sew these together. Then I'll add the next 2. And then the next 2. After that, I'll cut the thread, and then I will add the 3rd piece of every row to this. And after I have all those pieces sewn together, then I will start sewing the rows into the 9 patch. Okay, here's what it looks like. For this block, we need to make 4 9 patches. So once you have your 9 patches made, we can start assembling the block. And this is how I'm going to have my 9 patches like. I have a red on the outside and a red on the inside. Then I take a rectangle of background, 2 stuck here, and sew this to the edge. And again, I'm working vertically. So we're sewing this block together like a large 9 patch. So those are the first 2 pieces in my first row. The next 2 pieces in my second row will be background and then a center. And then my third row will be another 9 patch and another piece of background. And then we'll add the final column. So I'm making sure my reds are in the right place. I have them going, like I said, on the outside and the inside. So I just double check that every time to make sure. My final piece of background goes here, and then my final 9 patch. Okay, and now I open everything up and just take a look. Make sure everything's in the right position. And yep, it is. So then I will sew these 2 final seams together. After you have the 2 final seams sewn together, the molasses cookie block is finished. Now that wraps it up for today. I'm sorry, I didn't realize until I was editing this and getting ready to post it. I thought I was filming, but I must have not had my camera on when I was sewing the half of the block. But just follow along with the pattern. I have real pictures in there from when I made this, and I think that that's helpful. But if you have any questions, just let me know. So this is the toffee block, and then the other block is the molasses cookie block. So again, if you have any questions, just let me know. And if not, I'll see you back here soon. Thanks for following along.